He got in a car which pleased Mother. Now there were 2 cars in the family, which probably got her feeling of some kind of economic worth and social standing. The truth of the matter was that he was at the air station all day and not working, was never home, and never seemed to bother Mother, as I was available most of the time. I drove Steve back to school after the holidays. Was that a long drive?
Ithaca, New York, yeah.
You drove him in your car, right?
Yeah.
Whether Thanksgiving or Christmas, I do not recall specifically. As we drove, he would relate about school and the various social functions he would be involved in, and how much he looked forward to them. His grades were excellent considering he was carrying an engineering course, and I remarked that I wish I could do as well. He brushed it aside and continued about school, talking generally and never being too specific on any topic. It was obvious to me that he felt no feelings about leaving. On the contrary, he seemed grateful that he was returning to school. He felt no sense of duty or obligation towards home, and stated his main objective was to finish school and go on to a well-paying job, preferably out of state. I had no quarrel with that, and I rather envied the independence and sense of concern for his own welfare and future. I only wished I could generate some of that self-interest and inner direction. He seemed to be fully absorbed with his own self-interest and did not think it was desirable or expedient to concern himself about anything else. At school, he had a small bedroom apartment which had just acquired in his junior year. He stated that he was thankful to be out of the dormitory jungle. After viewing the crowded condition of men's dormitory, I could understand why. I noticed that he was wearing some of his officers' pink from the Army, but made no comment about it. We chatted a bit, strained, and there was always nothing intrinsic or special in our relationship.
Who's this, Steve?
Yeah, he's wearing something in school. You said he was wearing his officer's pinks. What's an officer's pinks?
That's uniform.
He's wearing that at school?
Well, he's in the ASTP, yeah.
He seemed to be a difficult personality from his usual bubbly self that I observed when he was with Jimmy Duncan or his other friends. I drove home. I thought Steve's situation and compared it to mine. Here we were in the same parents, but certainly we did not have the same talents and personal disposition. I thought his more favorable predisposition would go further in life than my meager ability and skills. Certainly he had attained more than I had at this stage in life. I accepted that, fair and or unfair. Is it live? But I could not understand, and certainly I was not in any position to prejudge his behavior, was why he would flaunt his good fortune to the extent. Male? Extent his good fortune to the extent he did. His ceremonious braggadocious increased as time went on, which only drew a wedge deeper into our relationship. I assumed my response to his behavior did not affect him in any way, and he did not consider it meaningful. Granted, his God-given talents were his alone, but most assuredly they were not derived from a void. He inherited them the same way I did, and therefore he could not take full credit for them. He may have cultivated and nurtured them, but they were primarily from the same source, his parents or any God or God himself. He was fortunate and realized, but I always felt that he took much credit upon himself for his God-given talents. Mother realized this, and as the years went on by time he was coming close, she perceived more fully his pretentiousness and it was times angered by it. In essence, what she was saying was, I had a part in your good fortune, or at least give me some of the credit, and humble enough to recognize it as such. This, I believe, was looked upon favorably by my parents. There was a certain ego satisfaction on their part, and rightfully so, as if to say, look at my son, and he will achieve from a paltry, insignificant beginnings. To my mother's credit, she never bragged outwardly to anyone, though she felt that she might be justified. My father was another matter. Hence he had several Packards second-hand, which Steve enjoyed driving and being seen in. Put in that sort of perspective, I could see how I might be relegated to the position I found myself in. I displayed no great talents. My life proved that I had no outstanding achievements or great success behind me, so why utilize me to their advantage, which they did. I was not going to bring any talent or honors to their name before I was one of them, and I must share the load and burden of life thrust upon us. Steve and I would never be close, and our relationship dwindled to a polite, nondescript exchange of words whenever we would meet. Nothing more. This was to endure for the most part of our lives, and there was never being anything more. I was back home, left to my own fate, to do what I must, given what was bequeathed to me and my personal legacy. I could not help thinking of Jean, how greatly differently she was from her brother, and how she managed her talents and great gifts in a manner more acceptable to me. Work at the mill was intolerable, and I did not know how much longer I could sustain myself in its environment. I only knew I would have to find something comparable money-wise, or Mother would never let me hear the end of it. It was either get something else, which paid at least as much, or stay here and keep looking for something better. I kept looking, but there was nothing available. All I heard from the VA was return to school and give yourself a chance to find something you like and were satisfied with. School was out as far as I was concerned. Under circumstances at home, it would be intolerable. Of course, Lookie was going during the day to a short period of time, but I believe Mother was leave to see some of his time occupied with other things other than drinking and staying out all night. So I drifted with the job, and I had hoard, but in no way extricate myself at a home and social life in a wrenched, desolate waste state. I never related my inner thoughts and fears to anyone, primarily because there was no one to tell them to, and I could not reveal my inner concern to anyone. The bottom line was I had nothing going for me, and no one seemed to care. All I heard at work with my fellow workers was talking about bowling and shuffleboard, and at other times, bowling and shuffleboard.
X amount, I guess, of what, points or whatever.
I was still being cajoled by a crew, and I worked with going with them to the neighborhood tavern, the Red Spot, a short distance from the mill. Here where they would drink beer and play shuffleboard, and in between talk about the day's event at work. In a way, I envied their contentment and perfect satisfaction with their lives and with what they were doing. I did not want any part of their life. I had my fill during a regular workday. Therefore, I would meander home and listen to somewhat different, diversified tune, but pretty much the same texture, it not of the same substance. Well, hello, Claire.
Sounds
at John.
kind of familiar up here.
Yeah, come on in.
Come on in, Claire. We got a seat reserved for you.
Yeah,
Look who's here, Mr. Jeckovich.
John.
That's right.
Look who's here.
Slide on leg.
John.
Look who's here.
But,
Claire.
oh, man, I seen her this morning. Yeah. Tell me all the voices he heard.
She's doing good.
Huh?
Have a seat,
You had
Claire.
breakfast with Claire? Or you just seen Claire?
Just saw it.
Yeah. Have some cookies or whatever, with peanuts.
Thank you.
How you doing today, Claire?
Fine.
You're looking well.
Thank you.
We're just reading on a chapter. It's about that he's out of the service and he's still going to work taking care of his mother. And his friend from France was a nun called Renee, and they sent her to another country to be a missionary. And she
To
had,
cleanse her, to cleanse her,
what's that?
to cleanse her.
To cleanse her.
She was in a
They
part
thought-
of resistance too long.
because they found out she was in French resistance, so they sent her as a nun to another country to so-called, I put in quotes, to cleanse her, and she ended up getting murdered there. So that's where we're at. But we're still talking about his different jobs and his brothers and things like that. So here we go. Picking up again on page 492. And he's talking about his workers that he worked at. All he wanted to do was talk about sports and go to bars drinking, primarily called the Red Spot, but he wanted to have nothing to do with any of that crap. He didn't want to drink, he didn't want to just sit there and waste his life, he wanted to better it. And so as a result, not too many people where he worked bothered with him because he didn't want to go drinking. Yeah.
It wasn't one of the boys.
He didn't want to go drinking, which was smart. I did not want any part of their life. I had my fill during a regular workday. Therefore, I meandered home and listened to somewhat diversified tune, but pretty much of the same texture, if not the same substance. Mother would go about working too hard and never having any time to herself. She was crocheting, and she would spend several hours at night sitting in her overstuffed chairs in a small living room, crocheting and listening to the radio. She would listen to the Lux Radio Theater, which was one of her favorites, Grand Central Station, and another weekly program. Of course, there was also Fibber, McGee, and Molly, which she enjoyed as well as the Lights Out. And there was always the indomitable Orson Welles. By 10 p.m., she was ready for bed. After she retired, I would read and listen to the radio turned down low. Did you have a TV at that time?
No.
That was before the days when everybody had TVs.
Oh, okay. By midnight, I would call it a day and start all over the next day. I did not like my drab and dull existence, but I could see no way out, but much less looking forward to something unforeseen happening which would change my course of my entire life. It was not going to happen, and it gradually sank into the depths of my mind that this would be my life from here on in. I did not like it, but it appeared that I was stuck with it. During this period of snappish irritability, I thought of Renee and how her life was ended and that she had no one to support her in her final days. Her love of mankind was certainly put to the test those last few days, and I am confident she withstood the critical ordeal. Her strong spirit and great fortitude sustained her throughout its worst moments. and I am sure her faith was her saving grace. I only wish we had corresponded during these tragic times, and I had said something more lasting to look back on instead of my fleeting memories. I still did not tell anyone about Renee, as I did not want to share her with anyone in my immediate environment. It was not until I was married that I could finally relate my time with Renee to a person I felt would sense the depth of my devotion to her. It was a spontaneous and natural occurrence that afforded me much needed love. I finally did not see myself, who once drove her to the ultimate decision of seeking religious refuge and ultimately to Indochina. Had we chosen a different path, who is to say it would not have been as destructive as Vietnam? I was justified in my bringing her to my world, for that would have been, it would have been, I was justified in not bringing her into my world, for that would have been catastrophic. Do you mean bringing her to your world by taking her to see your mother?
Yeah.
That wouldn't work?
No.
How would your mother take it?
My mother would take it rough.
It probably caused a lot of friction.
Huh?
Cause a lot of friction?
Well, yeah, she'd be yakking all the time. She'd go in the bedroom, close the door, and not talk to nobody at all.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And did you think she'd understand Renee's French? Do you think she'd understand Renee's language? Your mother? Renee didn't speak much English. Do you think your mother would understand much of Renee's language?
No, she kicked it out to her, yeah. Renee knew some English.
So you don't think it would go too well?
Well, she wasn't born up in America, she was born in France.
At first she was reluctant to stay longer than a few minutes, but after a few days we talked about books and we both read at the movies. And we had, toward the end of the midnight shift, we were chatting like old friends. I knew she enjoyed our conversation as we were meeting earlier than she normally leave for work. I was flattered by her action, but never mentioned it to her. I would see her occasionally in the cafeteria at work, and she would just smile gently and acknowledge me with her eyes, rather than say anything or just wave. It took a matter of course, for in the hierarchy of social status at the mill, production workers were low men on a totem pole. So you're telling me this lady that we're talking about worked in the office of the place you worked, and you would see her at the library and take her out, but when you bumped into her to work, she would just glance at you because you weren't
Part of the working crew.
you weren't an office worker.
Yeah. I am working in the office now.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Most had no formal education, and they did not wear white shirts and ties. So everyone in the office wore a white shirt and tie.
Who?
Everyone at the mill that worked the office wore a white shirt and tie.
Yeah.
Oh boy. The only ones who afford this sort of status were the outstanding bowlers and athletes of the company's softball and basketball leagues. So where you work, there was bowling leagues, softball leagues, basketball leagues,
hockey too.
oh my God. And these were just the people that worked inside the factory, right?
Yeah.
And depending how good they are is what kind of status they had amongst the workers, right?
Yeah. They all went, one went, the other one went. So if they were at the hockey game, they got went together, yeah. It was a little clique.
Unbelievable. I did not fit into any of these categories, so I knew my position as far as Rose was concerned. So Rose was the lady that you met in the library in Niagara Falls, and it just so happened she worked the same place you worked.
Well, I met Rosalie. She lived on Royal Avenue, and Kevin was on Packer Road. Well, in between Royal Avenue and Packer Road was a drive street Well, she come out of work, started going to work about 7:30, 8 o'clock. I would meet her at the intersection, and we talked for a while.
Okay, okay, I understand now. So that's not the lady you met at the library?
That lady I met in the library, no, that's different.
That was Phyllis, right?
Yeah, that's the one that lived across, next door to the library.
All right, so I'm just trying to understand this.
Phyllis, that was Phyllis.
So Rose worked in the front office of where you worked.
Yeah. Her
And what
father
did-
works there too.
What did your father do?
Father works in the paper mill.
Okay. And
Beater
so,
room, beater room.
the beater room, right?
Yeah.
So what is exactly is the beater room?
Well, he beats up the paper pulp and makes paper out of it.
And then he sends it to where?
To the job was to make magazines and stuff like that.
Okay.
But it was a long process though. We just did a little part of it.
And what department were you in?
I was in the machine room.
Machine room. Didn't you tell me some of the machines were from the 1800s and some of the machines today?
Some of the dryers were, yeah.
Some of the dryers from the 1800s?
But the equipment I ran, the screens were equipment. They were up to date.
But the dryers are from the 1800s.
Nah, they weren't that old. They were the dryers. Well, how old was Kimberly? They were as old as Kimberly.
So let me ask you, do you think those dryers are still in Kimberly right now?
Huh?
Do you think they're still operating right now, those dryers?
And Kimberly, yeah, because Nitec's running it. Yeah, they gotta dry that paper.
So they're still the same dryers, you believe?
Yeah. They're big cylinders that had to heat them up inside, and the thing is a mile long.
Wow, it's a mile long.
Mile long.
That's interesting. So getting back to Rose, you would meet her around Royal Avenue when she was coming out, and she would work in the office. And when she's not in the office, you and her are talking nice and getting along fine, but when you went back to work, when she seen you, she just kind of glanced and gave a smile. She didn't want to think she was.
Well, I didn't have contact with her at work. She worked in the office, in that big red building on Packard Road.
Yeah.
She worked in there. She never come into the mill.
Okay. I thought you said possibly in the lunchroom you might bump into.
Well, they go to the restroom, the girls sit together.
Okay.
I was in a pile of a bunch of girls.
Her father worked at the mill, but in a different department from mine, and spoke broken English, which embarrassed Rose somewhat.
Well, that's what she's worried about. We were getting pretty close. She didn't want to wind up as a mill wife. That's why she took this guy for the
Because her
office.
father worked at the mill.
Yeah, and worked in the beer room.
You said he had broken English. Was it Italian or Polish?
Polish.
Polish. Is he one of the people that you delivered newspapers from your Polish route? Was he on your Polish newspaper route?
Yeah. Well, he lived on Royal Avenue. I delivered the paper there.
Her mother was of short stature and spoke in broken English too. They both seemed like loving and caring parents, and I liked them. Rose's sister lived upstairs and married to someone who worked at the mill.
No, Rose's sister worked at Kresge's office downtown.
And she married someone that worked at the mill.
No, she married a guy, yeah, but she made a mistake. They didn't want to get connected with the mill at all. She didn't want to be a mill wife.
I had seen him around the mill. Rose was outwardly fidgety, and it gave me a tremendous insight into her character and temperament, and explained a lot of her reserved ways. I found her more attractive, and she seemed to disregard some of her defensive behavior and revert to her natural self. I still felt apprehensive about our relationship and was having the...
Oh, we'd go out, she said, well, you got to go back to school. You got to go back to school. You can't be hooked up in a damn mill.
Is that the reason why? Because her father worked at the mill, right?
Yeah. She didn't want to be a mill wife.
But her sister married someone that worked at the mill. That's what it says here.
Yeah, he worked at the mill. There's somebody else that moved out and went to Wisconsin. He's the one who worked in the office, and he transferred out to go to Wisconsin.
Well, when you said she lived upstairs, are these apartments are these houses on Royal Avenue?
Yeah.
Most of them had a bar downstairs,
No, there are two family houses.
Right on Royal Avenue.
First, two family houses, a family downstairs and a family upstairs, just like ours.
Okay. But that's real close to Kimberly. That was real close, wasn't it?
The what?
Close in distance to Kimberly. It was not far from Kimberly.
Well, Kimberly was on Packard Road, and you had to just go across that street, look at Packard Road and Royal Avenue.
We chatted, her parents and I could see that Rose was anxious to leave. As I followed her through the tiny front parlor to the outside door, I admired her shapely legs. Here we go.
What was this?
You said, you're in Rose's house on Royal Avenue,
I mean the parents.
talking to the parents. We chatted, her parents and I could see that Rose was anxious to leave. Why was she fidgeting? She didn't want you to talk to her parents.
Well, with me there, yeah.
As I followed her through the tiny front parlor to the outside door, I admired her shapely legs and the black heel pumps she was wearing. But the revealing thought just struck me. As I moved towards the door of an altogether different emotional conundrum. The thought was pronounced that it was almost akin to my premonition. Was the association with Rose would never materialize into anything.
Now, well, Rose knew that. I knew that.
Why is
She
that?
kept telling me, go to school, get out of here. Go to school, get out of here. Go to school, get out of here.
What the hell happened? Did Rose finally end up marrying an office guy?
Rose,
Who she finally married? An office worker with a
office worker, and they
tie?
moved to Wisconsin.
So she married an office worker,
Yeah,
white shirt and tie,
yeah,
and then they moved to Wisconsin.
yeah.
That's very interesting.
Well, she wanted to get rid of the parents.
And did she get rid of the parents?
Well, she didn't live, the parents didn't come with her. She went with her husband, her so-called husband now.
You thought they met at the mill when she
Yeah.
worked at the.
He was the manager of the mill, he worked in the office.
What do they do in the office of a mill? Sell?
Well, there was all kinds of work. They had customers all over the world,
Like what would they do?
selling paper and everything else.
They're salesmen, basically.
Huh?
Were they basically salesmen? Were they salesmen? Is that what they were?
What, in the office?
Yeah.
No, they make up records, putting records up, say, $1 million for this order here, you haven't paid it yet. They were talking $1 million order from all over the world, from Kimberly.
When Rose ended up marrying the office worker and moved to Wisconsin, did you ever hear from Rose or see Rose and her
No,
sister again?
no. I never went to Wisconsin.
So they probably stayed in Wisconsin.
And then I quit Kimberly then.
What?
I walked out of Kimberly, yeah.
The thought so pronounced that it was almost akin to my premonition. Rose would never materialize into anything significant. My instincts proved correct, and over a short period of time, it became more pronounced.
What?
That you weren't going to seeing Rose anymore. That it wasn't a good relationship
With her? With
for you
Rose?
and her.
Rose wanted to get an office worker. She wanted to get a job that give her a little less prestige.
As we entered the car and drove away, I took her hand. It was ice cold. I squeezed it slightly and said, "Are you okay?" She said nothing but held my hand firmly. I said that I thought her parents were loving people and I liked them very much. She held my hand slightly and murmured, "Thank you." Then she moved close to me, and
See, we had a good relationship. We would make a good couple.
Okay.
But what stopping her was a stupid interference with that stupid job.
Okay, so the job was a problem.
Yeah.
What you said here earlier, social standing.
Well, she went bowling with the girls. She went hockey shows with the girls. No, she was real sociable at the mill. But she didn't want to hook up with a mill hand. Her father worked in the mill. He worked in the beater room. And she didn't want to wind up as a mill hand wife.
I could understand what she was going through, for I could imagine I would be the same response if I took someone to see my family. I knew then that we had crossed an invisible boundary, but the thought she prevailed in my mind.
Well, I would go out and see all